the silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape.
Hey, welcome back to Real Talk Horror Edition, the podcast where we peel back the layers of fear to uncover what truly makes horror tick. I'm your host Josh, and today we're diving headfirst into part 3 of our exploration of psychological horror, trauma, and transformation. If you've been following along, you know this series is all about films that don't just aim to scare you. They aim to dig deep into your psyche, challenge your perceptions, and leave you unsettled. In this segment, we're shifting focus to a particularly gut-wrenching aspect of psychological horror. Stories that channel personal pain into raw, unrelenting terror. These films take life's most universal struggles, grief, loss, family conflict, and magnify them into something almost unbearable. They show us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't lurking under the bed or hiding in the shadows. They're the ones we carry within us. Over the next 7 episodes, we'll unpack the films that define this theme, offering a mix of emotional depth, chilling horror that's as thought-provoking as it is terrifying. And what better way to start this journey than with Ari Aster's 2018 film, Hereditary. If you've seen it, you already know. This is no ordinary horror film. Hereditary is an emotional gut punch wrapped in a chilling cinematic experience. It's the kind of movie that stays with you, gnawing at the edges of your mind long after the lights come back on. Written and directed by Aster, Hereditary doesn't just terrify, it devastates. It explores grief and generational trauma in ways that feel both deeply personal and universally unsettling. The film acts as a perfect storm of psychological tension, supernatural dread, and raw emotion, making it the ideal entry point for this chapter of our series. What makes Hereditary so impactful is how it uses the horror genre to confront themes that are often too difficult to face head-on. At its heart, it's about how the weight of family secrets and unspoken pain can warp and unravel us. But Aster doesn't stop there. He layers in a supernatural dimension that amplifies these fears, creating a film that is as intellectually engaging as it is emotionally devastating. So buckle up, because this one's a journey into madness and despair you won't soon forget. Whether you're here for the supernatural thrills, the raw emotional depth, or simply to see how far a film can push the boundaries of psychological horror, Hereditary has it all. Let's dive in. Ari Aster's Hereditary stands as a monumental work in psychological horror, offering a terrifying exploration of everything we've talked about in this series, from mind games, trauma, perception, the fear of the unknown. This film thrives on psychological manipulation, both within the characters and between the filmmakers and us in the audience. This film is about the Graham family's descent into madness, and it feels almost inevitable as grief, guilt, and the weight of family secrets start to unravel them. From the very beginning, Hereditary sets the stage for a deep psychological unraveling. The death of Ellen, the family matriarch, is a catalyst for everything that follows. Yet her presence, though absent in the flesh, lingers throughout the film in ways that feel chilling and almost malevolent. The entire Graham family, especially Annie, played here masterfully by Toni Collette, is thrust into a psychological battle that they did not sign up for. Annie is introduced as a woman already struggling with grief, her mother's recent passing leaving her raw and unmoored. But as the film progresses, her emotions, grief, guilt, and shame are all manipulated in increasingly sinister ways. both by the supernatural forces surrounding her and by her own fractured psyche. We're never sure if Annie's descent into madness is a product of her trauma and guilt, or if she is truly being tormented by something far more malevolent, something that's been lurking in her family for generations. Aster uses this uncertainty to pull us into a web of mind games where we question whether the terror is rooted in Annie's psychological breakdown, or if there's a much darker, more supernatural force at play. The manipulation is not just a plot device, but a thematic core, making us as viewers complicit in the horror. The feeling of powerlessness in the face of these unknown forces is what makes Hereditary so deeply unsettling. And one of its greatest strengths is how it keeps us on edge by constantly blurring the lines between psychological horror and supernatural dread. At first, we're led to believe that Annie's unraveling is primarily due to the trauma of losing her mother and her daughter Charlie's tragic death. But as the events unfold, Aster deftly introduces elements of the occult, mysterious symbols, cryptic rituals, and unnerving occurrences that cast doubt on the very nature of the terror the family is experiencing. Is Annie's spiral into madness simply a byproduct of unprocessed grief, or is the family truly under siege by a demonic cult that has ties to generations of their own bloodline? Aster skillfully places us in the liminal space, keeping us guessing and never allowing us to fully trust the reality that we're experiencing. This uncertainty, this inability to differentiate between what's real and what's imagined, is one of the film's most psychologically tense elements. It creates a suffocating atmosphere of doubt, forcing us to confront our own fears and the unsettling thought that sometimes we may not be able to trust our own perceptions. The psychological depth of Hereditary is largely attributed to its characters, each of whom carries emotional baggage that shapes their actions and reactions in profound ways. At the center of the film is Annie, whose grief is palpable and complex. She's not just grieving her mother's death. She's grappling with the weight of a lifetime of unresolved trauma. Annie's attempts to process her pain through art, especially her depiction of grief and loss in her work, feels genuine. Yet, ultimately, it is revealed that she is only scratching the surface of her pain. Her use of seances, an attempt to communicate with her deceased daughter, is a poignant moment that demonstrates her desperation, as well as her attempt to regain control over the uncontrollable. It's a manifestation of her need to repair the shattered pieces of her family, but in doing so, she opens a door to darker forces. Meanwhile, her son Peter's psychological state is just as important. His alienation and guilt after Charlie's death lead him down a path of torment that mirrors his mother's descent. The guilt he carries becomes an internalized force that affects everything he does, and his inability to communicate or process his emotions only amplifies his psychological horror. Peter's experiences serve as a foil to Annie's, showing how grief and trauma affect each individual differently, but both lead to the same tragic and inevitable unraveling. These characters are painfully human in their flaws and brokenness. They feel real, making their pain all the more excruciating to watch. The film doesn't just rely on surface-level horror tropes. It digs deep into the emotional and psychological undercurrents that drive these characters to the edge of madness. Hereditary also excels at playing on the fear of the unknown, a central theme in psychological horror. From its hauntingly ambiguous opening sequence to its mind-bending finale, the film creates a sense of dread that feels almost tangible. One of the key elements Aster uses to evoke fear is the play of light and shadow. Many of the film's most terrifying moments occur in the corners of the frame, in the peripheral vision of the characters, and in the spaces where the unseen lurks. The idea that something sinister is always just out of sight, the fear of what we can't see, understand, or control is a constant throughout the film. We're never fully allowed to see the true horror until the very end, which only amplifies its power. The ambiguity of what's truly happening to the Grahams builds an unnerving atmosphere. It keeps us on edge and fosters a sense of isolation. The characters are trapped, not only by their grief and trauma, but by their inability to comprehend or even recognize the full scope of the forces acting on them. In the world of Hereditary, the unknown is more terrifying than anything we could have anticipated. Whether it's the eerie, cryptic symbols or the inexplicable deaths that occur within the family, Aster leaves us with a lingering sense of unease, that nothing in this world can be fully explained, that fear of the unknowable is what makes Hereditary so psychologically potent, and it's a theme that resonates, making Hereditary a masterclass in psychological horror, because it does more than simply create scares. It taps into the darkest parts of the human experience, turning personal grief and trauma into something monstrous. Through manipulation, perception, and an all-encompassing fear of the unknown, Ari Aster crafts a film that is as emotionally devastating as it is terrifying. By focusing on the internal struggles of the characters, Hereditary makes us confront the ways our own personal demons can shape and destroy our lives. When it comes to creating psychological horror, the atmosphere and tone are absolutely crucial. And in Hereditary, the entire filmmaking team doesn't just create an eerie mood, they craft an all-encompassing, suffocating experience. Every aspect of the film's atmosphere, from its cinematography to its sound design to its setting, work in tandem to enhance the emotional and psychological terror. Let's take a closer look at how Ari Aster, along with cinematographer Pavel Pogorzelski, I apologize, that's a rough name, composer Colin Stetson, and production designer Judy Becker, use these tools to build a sense of dread and unease. Starting with Pavel Pogorzelski's cinematography in Hereditary, it is a masterclass in creating tension through visual composition. One of the key elements of the film's style is its use of lingering, symmetrical shots that evoke the unsettling feeling of being trapped in a dollhouse. The camera often frames characters within the confines of rooms, doorways, or windows, as though they are unable to escape their emotional turmoil. This visual motif underscores the central theme of entrapment, both literal and metaphorical, as the characters become imprisoned by their grief, trauma, and terrifying family secrets they cannot escape. Pogorzelski also uses dim, natural lighting to enhance the oppressive tone of the film. Unlike many horror films that rely on exaggerated shadows or overtly supernatural lighting to create unease, Hereditary keeps things grounded. The lighting is soft but cold, and it often feels muted, contributing to the film's overall sense of isolation and emotional numbness. There are moments when the camera lingers uncomfortably on characters' faces, giving us a front row seat to their pain, confusion, and despair. These shots don't just communicate the character's emotional state, they also create a sense of discomfort for the audience, forcing us to confront these difficult emotions heads on. You're never allowed to look away. The slow, deliberate pace of the camera also adds to the tension. Aster uses long takes that build anticipation, forcing us to sit with the uncomfortable stillness before something horrific happens. This method of pacing creates an unease that builds gradually until, by the time something does happen, you feel utterly drained by the emotional weight and suspense. If the cinematography sets the tone, the sound design and music make it unbearable. Colin Stetson's score is one of the most effective components of the film's atmosphere. His music is relentless, with droning, dissonant tones that burrow into your psyche. It's not a traditional horror score with sharp staccato strings or heavy jump scare cues. Instead, it's subtle, almost invasive. The music often swells to a point where it feels less like an accompaniment to the film and more like a living, breathing force that's feeding off the character's emotional pain. The score is so omnipresent that it almost becomes an extra character in itself, unseen but deeply felt. In addition to the score, the film's sound design plays a significant role in creating a sense of discomfort. There's a constant presence of low-frequency sounds, such as humming, buzzing, and distant knocks that keep you on edge, even in moments of relative quiet. These sounds don't just enhance the horror. They also emphasize the character's growing paranoia, their sense of disconnection from reality, and their inability to escape the terror surrounding them. The quieter moments are just as unsettling as the loud ones, because the sound design slowly builds this tension in the background, creating an atmosphere where nothing feels safe or stable. The setting of Hereditary is, in many ways, a character in itself. The Graham family home is simultaneously a sanctuary and a prison. At first glance, the house seems to embody the picture of suburban normalcy, spacious, neat, and relatively well maintained. But as the film progresses, the house becomes an increasingly claustrophobic space. Its isolation from the outside world intensifies the family's emotional detachment. And the maze-like structure of the house, complete with its dark corners, narrow hallways, and tight spaces, mirrors the family's fractured relationships and psychological turmoil. Another striking aspect of the home is its connection to the family's history, especially Ellen's lingering influence. The home is filled with relics of the past, photographs, art, objects, many of which are tied to the family's history of trauma and tragedy. There's a tangible presence of the past that hangs over everything. And as the film unfolds, the house becomes less of a home and more of a prison, trapping the characters in their unresolved grief and making it impossible for them to move forward. The setting is also integral to the sense of confinement that pervades the entire film. While the outside world is implied, it's often kept just out of sight. The characters are so deeply enmeshed in their own personal hell that they rarely venture beyond the walls of the house, reinforcing the idea that they're trapped, both physically and psychologically. This isolation amplifies the horror, making it feel as though the characters are caught in a never-ending cycle of grief and pain with no escape. Hereditary's atmosphere and tone are built upon a delicate balance of visual, auditory, and environmental elements that work together to create an all-encompassing sense of dread. From the haunting cinematography and relentless score to the suffocating presence of the family home, every detail serves to enhance the emotional and psychological tension of the film. This carefully crafted atmosphere is key to understanding why Hereditary resonates so deeply with us. It's not just about the scares. It's about the way the film makes us feel trapped inside the emotional turmoil of the characters, and by doing so, it plunges us into a psychological horror experience that is as exhausting as it is unforgettable. In Hereditary, Ari Aster's exploration of trauma, grief, and the slow unraveling of a family is brought to life not only by the narrative, but also by the complex, richly developed characters. Each member of the Graham family is grappling with their own emotional turmoil, and the film examines how these personal struggles become inextricably linked to supernatural forces. The performances from the cast, particularly Toni, Collette, add immense depth to the characters, and the psychological horror becomes just as much about the family's internal collapse as it is about external malevolent forces. At the heart of the story is Annie Graham, played by Toni Collette, a woman whose emotional and psychological unraveling is the emotional core of the film. Initially, Annie is portrayed as a woman doing her best to maintain control over her grief. Her mother has just passed away, and she seems intent on keeping her family together, despite the heavy burdens of loss and the strained relationships that pervade their lives. But as the film progresses, Annie's attempts to keep it together begin to crumble. She faces both internal and external forces, her own buried trauma and guilt, the unsettling occurrences around her family, and the overwhelming weight of her grief, that all begin to surface with horrifying intensity. Colette's performance is nothing short of extraordinary. Annie's character oscillates between moments of restrained grief and explosive rage. In the early scenes, Collette gives us a woman who is trying to hold herself together, but is clearly already on the edge. She presents a mother and wife desperately trying to manage the chaos that seems to encircle her family, only to find that her efforts are futile in the face of supernatural horrors and long-buried secrets. For me, one of the most gut-wrenching moments of the film occurs when Annie, in a frantic outburst, blames herself for her daughter Charlie's death. This scene is an emotional crescendo that showcases Colette's ability to balance intense emotional pain with the simmering tension of Annie's growing madness. Her breakdown is more than just an emotional collapse. It's the moment that exposes the cracks in the entire family structure. As the supernatural elements take hold, Annie is forced to confront the deep, buried trauma of her family's past, including the unresolved grief over her mother's death and her strained relationship with her late mother. Annie's psychological state becomes increasingly unstable, with moments of hallucination and violent outbursts, and Collette plays each layer of unraveling with such raw intensity that we feel every ounce of her anguish. This gradual descent drives much of the horror. Watching Annie, a seemingly reliable character, lose her grip on reality is as terrifying as any supernatural element. While Hereditary introduces a malevolent cult with a demonic agenda, the true antagonist of the film is far more insidious and psychologically invasive. The cult's role in the plot is undoubtedly important, but what truly makes them terrifying is the way they exploit the emotional vulnerabilities of the Graham family. The supernatural forces at play are not just external threats. They are intimately tied to the family's past and their deeply rooted psychological wounds. The cult isn't just manipulating the family from the outside. They're exploiting the very grief, guilt, and resentment that have been fostering within the Grahams for generations. The film uses the concept of family legacy to show how trauma and guilt can become inherited, passed down from one generation to the next. As Annie learns more about her mother's involvement with the cult and the dark secrets surrounding her family, she becomes aware that the horror she's experiencing isn't random. It's the result of years of unresolved emotional pain. Grief becomes a weapon, tearing apart the family from the inside. Annie's guilt over her daughter's death, Peter's overwhelming feelings of responsibility for the tragedy, and the decades of resentment that exist between the family members are all psychological forces that make the supernatural horrors that unfold all the more terrifying. The psychological manipulation is what makes the cult's influence so devastating. It feeds off the family's fractured state, pushing them toward destruction in ways that feel, at times, even more tragic than the supernatural terror they face. It's in this way Hereditary doesn't just present a traditional antagonist. It actually explores how internal psychological demons can be just as deadly as external threats. The cult and their demonic agenda become the vehicle through which the family's deepest fears and emotional scars are exposed and exploited. The supporting characters in Hereditary each contribute to the film's emotional weight, adding depth to the narrative and underscoring the film's central themes of guilt, grief, and trauma. These characters are fully realized individuals who are, in their own ways, as damaged and haunted as Annie. Peter Graham, played by Alex Wolff, is one of the film's most heartbreaking characters. As the son of Annie and Steve, Peter's journey is marked by an overwhelming sense of guilt and isolation. His character's emotional depth is rooted in his involvement in Charlie's tragic death, which casts a long shadow over the entire family. Wolff's performance is subtle yet powerful, capturing Peter's inner turmoil and deep self-loathing without overtly stating it. Peter is a teenager struggling to make sense of his role in the tragedy, but his guilt is compounded by the ever-growing, suffocating sense that something far darker is at play. Wolff skillfully portrays Peter's gradual descent into paranoia, making it impossible not to empathize with him, even as his actions become more erratic. Gabriel Byrne as Steve Graham provides a rare moment of stoic normalcy amidst the family's chaos. Steve's character is the emotional anchor for the film. He's grounded, rational, and attempts to maintain a sense of order in the face of the mounting horror. Byrne's restrained performance contrasts sharply with Collette's explosive energy, and his stoicism adds a layer of grief and helplessness. Steve is caught between supporting his wife and protecting his son, but as the family's unraveling reaches its peak, his attempts to maintain stability become tragically futile. His character's arc is one of helplessness, a man watching his family fall apart without any clear way to stop it. And finally, Millie Shapiro's portrayal of Charlie is both eerie and poignant. Charlie's character, while not as deeply explored as the others, is central to the film's psychological horror. As the child who dies early in the film, Charlie's death sets the tone for everything that follows. Shapiro's performance is unsettling, capturing the oddness and vulnerability of Charlie in a way that feels both innocent and really disturbing. Charlie's strange behavior, including her tendency to create bizarre, macabre artwork, and her difficulty connecting with others, adds an element of tension from the start. Her death, both shocking and tragic, propels the family into a spiral of grief and supernatural chaos. Each family member in Hereditary is deeply affected by trauma, guilt, and grief, and the way their internal struggles manifest in their actions and ultimately in the terror that befalls them is what makes the film so psychologically impactful. The interplay between the personal, emotional unraveling of the characters and the supernatural forces at play make Hereditary a devastating exploration of human fragility. The performances from Collette, Wolff, Byrne, and Shapiro ensure that these characters feel real and relatable, even as they descend into madness. Through their individual journeys, Hereditary delves into the heart of psychological horror, the terror that comes not just from external forces, but from deep within ourselves. In Hereditary, Ari Aster employs a wide range of visual metaphors and psychological symbolism to enhance the film's exploration of trauma, loss, and generational conflict. These symbols deepen the horror and contribute to the unsettling atmosphere, transforming the film from just a supernatural thriller into a powerful meditation on the scars that shape us, even when we're unaware of their presence. One of the most striking visual metaphors in Hereditary is the dollhouse. Early on, we see Annie creating intricate miniature scenes as part of her artistic process. The dollhouse, with its precise control over every tiny detail, mirrors the illusion of control Annie tries to maintain in her life. On the surface, it's an expression of her need for order amidst the chaos of grief, loss, and family conflict. But as the narrative unfolds, the dollhouse also becomes a symbol of entrapment and manipulation. Just as Annie meticulously arranges the dollhouse's tiny furniture and the figures, she is herself manipulated by unseen forces, both supernatural and psychological. The dollhouse represents the family's fragile illusion of control over their fates. Yet it ultimately highlights how powerless they are in the face of the larger, uncontrollable forces at play. As we move through the film, the dollhouse shifts from being an emblem of Annie's artistic expression to a grim representation of the family's own disintegration. It's a perfect microcosm of the family's life, one that's curated from the outside but hollow and fragile from within. This unsettling dynamic is visually reinforced when Annie begins to recreate scenes from her own life in miniature form. She attempts to control and understand her reality by crafting these small-scale representations. But the more she tries to impose order, the more she is confronted by the inescapable horror and tragedy of her family's past. The dollhouse, in a sense, becomes a way for Annie to externalize her inner turmoil, a kind of distorted coping mechanism that ultimately proves ineffective. Throughout the film, the imagery of decapitation and fire acts as a recurring motif. Decapitation appears not just as a literal act of violence, but also as a metaphor for the severing of ties between family members, between generations, and even between individuals and their own sense of identity. The decapitations evoke feelings of loss and annihilation, underscoring the destructive nature of the grief and trauma that the Grahams are experiencing. Fire, meanwhile, represents both destruction and rebirth. It's an uncontrollable force that ravages the family's emotional landscape, symbolizing the purging and cleansing of the past, but also the irreversible damage that comes from it. In Hereditary, fire burns away not just the characters, but their very identities, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of what once was. The supernatural elements in Hereditary are not just inexplicable horrors that haunt the Graham family. They are the symbolic manifestations of the buried trauma that has been festering in the family for generations. At its core, the film is about the terror of confronting the past and the emotional baggage that follows us, even when we think we've buried it. The death of Annie's mother, Ellen, is the catalyst that brings these long-suppressed secrets to the surface. Ellen's death, which initially appears to be a tragedy that opens old wounds, actually serves as a grim revelation that there were forces at play all along. Forces that Annie and her family we're either unaware of or just chose to ignore. The demonic and supernatural elements in the film can be seen as a psychological representation of the Graham family's generational trauma. The cult and its dark practices, especially the summoning of spirits and the ritualistic sacrifice, become an externalized manifestation of the unresolved pain that has been passed down through generations. This inherited trauma isn't something that can be simply outrun or ignored. It's a weight that the Grahams must confront. And as they do, they realize that it has already shaped and manipulated their lives, often without their knowledge. The horror of Hereditary stems from this inescapable nature of trauma, how it persists, how it manifests in unhealthy ways, and how it affects not only those who endure it, but also those who come after them. In this way, the supernatural elements become not just plot devices, but integral symbols of the family's deepest fears. The idea that the demonic forces in the film are tied to their emotional scars highlights a powerful, disturbing truth. Our internal battles can become externalized, turning our greatest vulnerabilities into sources of terror. The family is not just haunted by spirits or cursed by a malevolent force. They are haunted by themselves, by the unresolved grief and the pain that have been passed down, haunting them from within. Now, while Hereditary is undoubtedly a personal and family-centered story, it also touches on some deeper social and cultural issues, most notably the stigma surrounding mental illness and the ways in which families cope or fail to cope with grief and trauma. Mental illness is never explicitly named in the film, but it certainly looms large in the background. Annie's struggle with her emotional state, her obsession with her mother's legacy, and her inability to connect with her family point to the difficulty many individuals face when dealing with their mental health. The film highlights the isolation that often accompanies emotional pain, how difficult it is for people to talk about their grief, guilt, or fears without feeling judged or misunderstood. Side note, that really resonates with me, someone who deals with grief and guilt and depression, and I don't know how to always deal with it, so I just disappear, much like the characters in this movie. Now, Hereditary is a film about how grief can erode our ability to function normally. Annie's inability to cope with her grief over her mother's death, and more importantly, with the generational trauma she inherits, becomes the trigger for the supernatural chaos that ensues. The film suggests that trauma doesn't just disappear, it's passed down, often unconsciously, from one generation to the next. Annie's struggles to cope is compounded by her feelings of inadequacy and her inability to be open with her family about her emotional state. This disconnect is at the heart of the film's emotional depth. It's not just about the terror of the supernatural, but also about the terror of being unable to process or express the weight of our inner pain. On a broader level, Hereditary critiques how society often dismisses or ignores the psychological toll of grief and trauma, especially within families. The film suggests that emotional pain is something that is often swept under the rug, left unspoken, and not dealt with in healthy ways. Annie's breakdown is not just a personal unraveling, but a commentary on how the lack of emotional expression and healthy coping mechanisms can tear apart individuals, families, and even entire legacies. The rich symbolism and subtext in Hereditary elevate it from a traditional horror film into something far more psychologically complex and resonant. The dollhouse, decapitation, fire, and the supernatural elements all serve as metaphors for the destructive power of grief and trauma, while the film's treatment of mental illness and emotional disconnect provides a sobering reflection on the ways in which we cope with life's most difficult challenges. Through these symbols, Hereditary invites us to reflect on the darkness within ourselves and the inescapable nature of the past, making this a deeply unsettling experience that truly lingers far beyond the final frame. As we come to the end of our discussion on Hereditary, it's impossible to ignore just how monumental a film this is in the landscape of psychological horror. Ari Aster's feature is more than just a supernatural thriller. It is a profound exploration of trauma, grief, and the generational scars that shape us. What makes Hereditary stand out is its ability to not only scare, but also to emotionally unsettle, leaving us with a lingering sense of unease. At the heart of the film is one that challenges us to confront our deepest fears. Fears of loss, of being trapped in an emotional cycle, and of not being able to break free from the trauma that's been handed down through the generations. This is not your average horror film, where the terror is driven by jump scares and grotesque monsters. Instead, it's the quiet, creeping sense of dread that takes hold of you, the kind that makes your stomach churn as you realize that the horror isn't just happening on screen. It's something deeply personal. Aster masterfully uses the genre to peel back the layers of the human psyche, forcing us to reflect on how our own past and emotional wounds shape the people we become. It's a horror film that doesn't just make you scared, it makes you feel profoundly unsettled about the fragility of the human condition. The performances elevate the material to something truly extraordinary. Toni Collette's portrayal of Annie is one of the best in recent memory, as she navigates a spectrum of grief, guilt, and rage. It is a performance that is both heartbreaking and terrifying, with Collette effortlessly moving between moments of subtle vulnerability and intense emotional outbursts. Her performance grounds the film in raw human emotion, which makes the supernatural elements even more chilling. Alex Wolff captures the emotional isolation and guilt of Peter with stunning depth, while Molly Shapiro brings an eerie presence to the role of Charlie, setting the stage for the horrors that follow. The entire cast delivers gripping, nuanced performances that contribute to the sense of unease that permeates every frame. The film's atmosphere is another standout element. Pavel Pogorzelski's cinematography, with its claustrophobic framing and haunting use of dim lighting, creates a sense of entrapment. The camera work often lingers on the characters' faces, forcing us to confront their pain, their fear, their helplessness. The house itself becomes a place of both sanctuary and prison, mirroring the emotional state of the family. The tension builds slowly but relentlessly, much like the mounting emotional pressure in Annie's life, and it culminates in a series of scenes that are both shocking and tragic. Colin Stetson's music is a constant presence, one that is as unnerving as the visuals. The dissonant, droning tones are relentless, much like the spiraling descent into madness that the family experiences. The score, designed not just to accompany, but to amplify the horror, burrowing deep into our heads and creating a soundscape that is oppressive and all-consuming. This synergy between sound and image amplifies the psychological dread that really defines the film. When you combine all of these elements, the atmosphere, the performances, the thematic depth, the masterful craftsmanship. You get a film that isn't just a story about a family's descent into horror. It's a film about the terror of confronting one's own emotions, the fear of not being able to break free from legacy of pain, and a chilling realization that sometimes we're at the mercy of forces far beyond our control. For all these reasons, Hereditary is a masterpiece, a film that lingers in your thoughts. It doesn't just scare you, but stays with you, gnaws at the edge of your mind. In the realm of psychological horror, few films manage to hit such an emotional and visceral chord. Hereditary is a film that will leave you thinking, reflecting, and questioning, both about the family on screen and about your own life. For its unparalleled atmosphere, gripping performances, and masterful storytelling, I give Hereditary a perfect 10 out of 10. It's a film that is not just scary, but deeply affecting, a work of horror that transcends the genre and stands as one of the most impactful films of its kind. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe to Real Talk Horror Edition so you don't miss out on future deep dives into the world of psychological horror. If you have a moment, I'd also love for you to leave a review. It really helps the show grow, and I'd be thrilled to hear your thoughts on Hereditary. Did it terrify you? Devastate you? Maybe a bit of both? What are your own interpretations of the themes of grief and trauma in the film? Join the conversation by reaching out to me on social media. We're on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Real Talk. We're also over on X or Twitter occasionally at Real Talk Pod, and I love hearing from all of you. Next time on Real Talk Horror Edition, we'll continue our journey into trauma and transformation with a 2014 film, The Babadook, another deeply personal horror film that explores grief and motherhood and the monsters we create. It's another intense, thought-provoking ride, so I hope you'll join me for that. And thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the dark corners of cinema, whether it's films like Hereditary or other hidden gems in the world of horror. There's always more to discover, so don't be afraid to look just a little bit closer.
Creeping through the silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape. Others play a twisted game. Fear and terror stake their claim. Footsteps follow close behind. Haunting thoughts invade your mind. Run away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll always stay. Windows rattle, doors they creak. Ghostly whispers start to speak. Every corner hides a fear. Close your eyes, they're drawing near. Candles flicker, spirits call. In the night they'll take it all. Midnight strikes, the clocks rewind. Nightmares now are intertwined. They'll away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll always stay.